The gentle hum of the UES Horizon's engines provided a soothing backdrop as Dr. Alan Murphy stared out the viewport at the massive alien station growing larger in the distance. Nexus 7 resembled a gleaming metallic snowflake, its crystalline spires catching the light of the nearby star in prismatic flashes. "Quite the sight, isn't it?" said Captain Olivia Grant, stepping beside him. "Mankind's first official diplomatic mission to an alien civilization. And you're our cultural expert." Alan nodded, absently adjusting his glasses. At 42, with graying temples and a professorial demeanor, he hardly fit the dashing image of a space diplomat. His specialty was comparative mythology and cultural anthropology, fields that hadn't seemed particularly practical until Earth detected the first Zorathian signals 3 years ago. "I still can't believe they chose me," Alan murmured. "Your credentials speak for themselves," Olivia replied. "And we need someone who understands the power of stories when introducing humanity to the stars." The ship's communications officer interrupted them. "Captain, we're receiving docking instructions from Nexus 7. The next few hours passed in a flurry of activity. Alan found himself standing with 7 other human representatives in an airlock chamber, hearts racing as the doors slowly parted to reveal their hosts. The Zorathians were tall, slender beings with iridescent skin that shifted colors subtly as they moved. Their large, multifaceted eyes seemed to take in everything at once. The lead alien stepped forward, raising 4-fingered hands in what appeared to be a practiced human greeting. "Welcome, Earth delegation. I am Coordinator Vex Lari of the Zorathian Alliance." The alien spoke in nearly perfect English, the voice modulated through a translation device. "We are pleased to establish formal relations with your species." The human ambassador stepped forward, making Earth's formal introduction. Alan watched, fascinated by the aliens' body language. Despite their careful politeness, he sensed something in their posture, a subtle tilt of their elongated heads, perhaps that suggested condescension. The formal greetings gave way to a tour of the station's diplomatic quarter. The Zorathian architectural style favored open spaces and geometric precision, with living plants integrated into every structure. Several other alien species moved about, though the humans were clearly the main attraction. During the welcome reception, Alan found himself approached by a Zorathian wearing elaborate insignia denoting academic status. "You are the cultural expert, yes. I am Excel Turin, Senior Anthropological Analyst." The alien's skin flickered with blue patterns. "I have studied your transmitted cultural database extensively." "It's an honor," Alan said, genuinely excited. "I'd love to hear your impressions of human culture." Zelturen tilted his head. "Most fascinating. Though I must admit, the prevalence of clearly fictional constructs throughout your historical records is puzzling." Alan blinked. "Fictional constructs. Your myths, gods, monsters, supernatural phenomena." The alien's skin darkened slightly. "Most developing species create such fantasies before achieving scientific understanding, but humans seem uniquely attached to these narratives, despite technological advancement. These stories serve important cultural functions beyond literal belief," Alan explained carefully. "Yes, as developmental scaffolding for primitive cognition, but continued attachment suggests a concerning failure to fully embrace rational thought." Zelturen responded, his tone clinical but unmistakably dismissive. Before Alan could respond, another Zorathian called Zelturen away. Alan stood there, unsettled. Throughout the remainder of the reception, he noticed similar exchanges between the humans and their hosts. Polite, curious, but tinged with unmistakable intellectual superiority whenever human cultural traditions came up. Later, in his assigned quarters, Alan reviewed his notes with growing concern. The Zorathians seemed to view human mythology and cultural narratives not as rich traditions worthy of respect, but as embarrassing evidence of humanity's intellectual immaturity. "They think we're children," he muttered to himself, staring at the alien stars through his window. Superstitious children playing with technology we barely understand. Alan sighed, closing his journal. First contact was going smoothly on the diplomatic front, but culturally, the gulf between their species might be wider than anyone had anticipated. The grand meeting hall of Nexus 7 buzzed with activity as human delegates mingled with representatives from the Zorathian Alliance. 1 week into the diplomatic mission, the initial formalities had given way to more substantial cultural exchanges. Alan Murphy watched from a corner as Zorathian scholars examined Earth artifacts with clinical precision. "Notice how they handle everything," whispered Greg Wilson, the mission's anthropologist. "Like scientists studying lab specimens, rather than people experiencing another culture." Alan nodded. The Zorathians had set up elaborate scanning stations where they digitally cataloged human books, artwork, and recordings. Their efficiency was impressive, but something felt off about their approach. "Dr. Murphy, would you join us?" called Ambassador Reyes. "The Zorathian Cultural Council has questions about human folklore." Alan made his way to a circular table where 5 Zorathians sat with holographic displays showing images from Earth's mythological traditions. He recognized exhilarating among them, the alien skin pulsing with amber patterns that Alan had learned indicated intense intellectual focus. "We are cataloging belief systems by region and era," explained a female Zorathian named Mevdora. "But we are encountering logical inconsistencies in your records." "What kind of inconsistencies?" Alan asked, taking the seat. "Your species simultaneously developed technologies requiring understanding of natural laws, while maintaining beliefs in supernatural entities," Tyron stated. "This cognitive dissonance appears widespread across human cultures." Alan smiled patiently. "Many humans compartmentalize spiritual beliefs and scientific understanding. They serve different purposes in our lives." The Zorathians exchanged glances, their skin flickering in what Alan now recognized as their equivalent of bemused condescension. "Fascinating," said another Zorathian analyst, "a form of selective rationality. Perhaps this explains humanity's slower technological progress compared to other species at similar development stages." Alan felt his face grow warm. "I wouldn't characterize it that way. We've compiled examples from your Greek mythology," Zelteren interrupted, displaying images of ancient statues and pottery. "Humans once believed lightning was thrown by a deity named Zeus, rather than understanding basic atmospheric electricity. Yet this belief persisted even after your species discovered conductive metals." "That's a simplification," Alan began. "And these dragons," continued another analyst, showing medieval artwork, "biologically impossible creatures that appear in narratives across your planet. Even after discovering dinosaur fossils and developing paleontology, humans continued creating entertainment featuring these imaginary beings." The meeting continued for 2 hours. With each example, Alan tried explaining the cultural context and meaning behind human myths, but the Zorathians seemed interested only in categorizing them as evolutionary cognitive errors. By the end, Alan's patience had worn dangerously thin. That evening, the human delegation gathered in their private quarters to discuss the day's events. "They're treating our entire cultural history like it's some kind of embarrassing childhood phase," Alan said, pacing the room. "As if storytelling itself is primitive." "The ambassador thinks we should just smile and nod," Captain Grant replied. "This is first contact. Some cultural friction is expected." "It's more than friction," Alan argued. "They're building a relationship with humanity based on a fundamental misunderstanding of who we are." The next morning brought a new development. The Zorathian High Council announced a formal cultural symposium to be held in 3 days, where their scholars would present their analysis of human mythology to the full Alliance membership. When Alan saw the symposium outline, his heart sank. The entire presentation framed human storytelling traditions as evidence of cognitive limitation. One section was even titled Mythological Thinking, an evolutionary roadblock. "They're going to present us as intellectually stunted children to the entire Alliance," Alan told Ambassador Reyes. showing her the outline. The ambassador sighed. "We can't tell them how to interpret our culture, Dr. Murphy. Our job is to establish diplomatic relations, not win academic arguments." Alan stared out at the alien station, watching ships from a dozen worlds dock at its gleaming ports. Humanity was taking its first steps into a galactic community, and their first impression would be shaped by these misunderstandings. There has to be a way to make them understand, he muttered to himself, an idea already forming in his mind. Their skin patterns shifting in rapid conversation. "Your request is granted, Human Murphy," the lead counselor finally announced. "You will have equal time tomorrow to present your perspective. This symposium seeks truth, even if it contradicts our initial analysis." Alan nodded, feeling the weight of humanity's cultural legacy on his shoulders. "I'll be ready." Alan spent the entire night in his quarters, surrounded by digital files and notes. Sleep was impossible with the weight of tomorrow's presentation on his mind. The Earth delegation had been divided about his impulsive decision. Half concerned he would damage diplomatic relations, half relieved someone was finally standing up for humanity's cultural dignity. "Computer, display comparative mythology database, section 12, he muttered, rubbing his tired eyes. Images floated before him. Creation myths from cultures separated by oceans and millennia, yet sharing surprising similarities. Flood stories that appeared in civilizations that had never contacted each other. Hero journeys that followed the same pattern across continents. When morning came, Alan had barely slept, but his mind was clear. He entered the symposium hall to find it even more crowded than the day before. Word had spread about the human challenger, and delegates from across the station had come to witness the exchange. Zell Turin stood near the presentation platform, his skin flickering with patterns that Alan now recognized as skepticism mixed with curiosity. "I did not expect such emotional investment in clearly outdated thinking patterns," the Zorathian remarked. Alan smiled. "That's exactly why I'm here today." The moderator called the symposium to order, and Alan took his place at the center of the hall. Instead of activating the standard holographic displays, he pulled a small wooden box from his pocket. "Before I begin with digital evidence, I want to show you something physical," Alan said, his voice carrying through the hall. "This belonged to my grandfather." He opened the box to reveal a simple silver pendant shaped like a tree. The alien audience leaned forward, sensors whirring as they analyzed the object. "My grandfather fled his homeland during a brutal civil war," Alan explained. "He lost everything, his home, most of his family, his community. During months in refugee camps, he held onto this pendant, which represents Yggdrasil, the world tree from Norse mythology." Alan placed the pendant on the scanning platform so it projected a large image for all to see. "Was your grandfather under the delusion that a giant tree supported your world?" asked a Zorathian analyst. "No," Alan replied calmly. "He was a physics teacher who understood perfectly well how planetary systems work. But this symbol connected him to his ancestors, to his cultural identity. It reminded him that even when everything seems lost, life continues." It gave him hope. Alan activated the main display, showing a series of early human cave paintings. "Humans didn't create myths because we failed to understand natural phenomena," he continued. "We created them because we needed frameworks for understanding our place in the universe, for processing tragedy, for building communities, and for passing down practical knowledge in memorable ways." The display shifted to show ancient star maps alongside mythological depictions of constellations. These stories weren't opposed to scientific understanding. They were the foundation that made science possible. They trained our minds to look for patterns, to ask questions about origins, to imagine possibilities beyond our immediate experience. Alan moved through his presentation with growing confidence. He showed how myths encoded practical knowledge about medicine, navigation, and agriculture in memorable narratives that could be passed down through generations before writing existed. When our ancestors told stories about gods punishing those who poisoned water sources, they weren't just expressing superstition. They were creating social rules that protected public health, Alan explained. When they personified stars as heroes or animals, they weren't failing to understand astronomy. They were creating memory systems that allowed sailors to navigate vast oceans. The alien delegates had grown noticeably quieter, several leaning forward with expressions Alan interpreted as growing interest. Most importantly, Alan continued, these stories helped us survive as a social species. They created shared identity, reinforced cooperation, and helped us process the fundamental questions all sentient beings face. Why are we here? What happens when we die? How should we treat each other? Alan glanced at Zelturan, whose skin had shifted to patterns he hadn't seen before, perhaps indication of deep thought. I propose that mythology isn't a sign of cognitive limitation, Alan concluded. It's evidence of cognitive sophistication, the ability to create meaning through narrative. And I suspect, if we look closely enough, we might find that every species in this hall has done something similar in their own development. You speak eloquently, Dr. Murphy, Zelturan said, breaking the silence. But eloquence does not equate to scientific validity. Alan nodded respectfully. Then let me offer evidence instead. He tapped his control panel, bringing up new displays around the hall. These are navigation charts created by Polynesian sailors thousands of years ago, Alan explained as intricate patterns of sticks and shells appeared. European explorers initially dismissed them as primitive art or religious symbols. But modern science has confirmed these charts accurately map ocean currents, star positions, and island locations across thousands of miles. The alien delegates leaned forward, their various sensory organs focused on the displays. The knowledge was preserved through chants, stories, and songs about gods and heroes traveling these routes. Alan continued. The myths weren't failed attempts at science. They were successful memory systems that encoded precise navigational data. Alan swiped to a new image showing ancient cave paintings alongside modern molecular diagrams. These indigenous Australian paintings were once dismissed as simple decorative art, he said. Recent analysis showed they accurately depict the molecular structure of certain plant compounds used in traditional medicine. The knowledge was preserved through stories about ancestral spirits teaching healing practices. A low murmur spread through the audience. Alan noticed several aliens making notes or scanning the images into their own devices. But perhaps most relevant to this gathering, Alan said, his voice growing stronger, is how mythology helped us imagine possibilities beyond our immediate reality, including the existence of beings from other worlds. He displayed ancient artwork depicting visitors from the stars alongside modern SETI radio telescope arrays. Long before we had the technology to detect your signals, humans told stories about intelligent life beyond Earth. These myths didn't prevent scientific progress. They inspired it. Many of our greatest space scientists cite science fiction, much of it rooted in ancient mythological themes, as their inspiration. Alan paused, looking directly at the Zorathian delegation. Myths aren't opposed to reason. They're complementary to it. They help us explore questions science hasn't yet answered, process emotions that pure logic can't address, and maintain social cohesion during times of uncertainty. A small, insect-like delegate near the front raised an appendage. Question: if these narratives served practical purposes, why maintain them after developing more precise scientific methods? Alan smiled. Because the human experience isn't just about accumulating facts. It's about finding meaning, processing grief, celebrating joy, and connecting with others. Our myths evolve alongside our science rather than being replaced by it. He displayed images of modern movies, books, and games that reimagined ancient myths in contemporary settings. Even now, with all our technology, we continue to create and share stories that aren't literally true, but contain emotional and social truths. They help us process complex ethical questions and imagine future possibilities. The hall had grown completely silent, with every alien delegate focused intently on Alan's words. He sensed he was reaching them in a way that raw data and logical arguments couldn't. I believe, Alan said, his voice soft but clear, that the capacity for mythological thinking isn't a flaw to overcome, but a strength to be valued. It's what allows us to see beyond what is to what could be. Without it, we might never have looked to the stars in the first place. Alan noticed something strange happening among the Zorathian delegation. Several of the younger members were displaying skin patterns he hadn't seen before, vibrant swirls of color that seemed almost emotional rather than analytical. One of the elder Zorathians spoke sharply to them in their native language, and they quickly suppressed these patterns, returning to more subdued colors. But Alan had seen it. There was something happening beneath the Zorathians' carefully maintained facade of pure rationality, something that reminded him very much of the human struggle between heart and mind. I believe, Alan concluded, meeting Exhilarating's multifaceted gaze, that the divide between mythology and science isn't as wide as it appears. And I suspect that humans aren't the only species to have discovered this. The symposium hall erupted into a buzz of alien languages as delegates discussed Alan's presentation among themselves. The Zorathian council members conferred with urgent skin patterns flickering between them. Alan stood quietly at the center, aware he had touched something unexpected. Exhilarating approached the platform, his normally confident posture slightly altered. "Your interpretation is interesting, Dr. Murphy," he said, his voice carefully measured. "However, I must point out that advanced civilizations naturally outgrow such narrative frameworks as they develop." "Do they?" Alan asked simply. Before Exhilarating could respond, a commotion broke out near the back of the hall. A younger Zorathian had stood up, her skin blazing with patterns that seemed to cause shock among her peers. "Tevlera, you will be seated," ordered one of the council members. "I will not," the young Zorathian replied, her translator conveying a tremor in her voice. "I have listened to the humans' words, and they echo truth we have long denied." The hall fell silent as Tevlera moved toward the central platform. Alan could feel the tension radiating from the Zorathian officials. "The human speaks of hidden knowledge preserved in narrative," she said, addressing the gathered delegates. "Our own history contains similar patterns, though we have been taught not to acknowledge them publicly." Exhilarating's skin darkened. "This is not the appropriate forum." "It is precisely the appropriate forum," Tevlera interrupted. "For 300 cycles, the scholarly consensus has suppressed our cultural narratives as primitive thought patterns, yet many of us still preserve them in private, knowing their value." She turned to Alan. "Human Murphy, your people's myths are remarkably similar to the stories of becoming that my ancestors passed down before the Great Rationalization." The council members were now displaying patterns that Alan interpreted as alarm mixed with embarrassment. One of them stepped forward. "Tevlera speaks of historical practices that our society has evolved beyond," he stated firmly. "They have no relevance to modern discourse." But Alan noticed something remarkable happening. Throughout the hall, delegates from various species had begun signaling for recognition, their own communication displays indicating urgent desire to speak. A reptilian delegate rose without waiting for permission. "The Vexcore Confederation has observed similar patterns among Zorathian representatives for many cycles. They present themselves as purely rational beings, while privately maintaining cultural practices inconsistent with that claim." "Is this true?" Alan asked Exhilarating directly. The senior analyst's skin displayed complex, conflicting patterns before settling into a more subdued state. "There are certain traditions," Exhilarating admitted reluctantly. 3 months after the symposium, Nexus 7 looked remarkably different. The once sterile meeting halls now displayed cultural artifacts from across the Alliance, including elaborate tapestries depicting Zorathian ancestral journeys that had been hidden in family vaults for generations. Alan walked through the newly established Cultural Exchange Center, where holographic displays showed myths and stories from a dozen worlds. Young Zorathians gathered around an elderly human storyteller who recounted an ancient Greek myth with theatrical gestures. "Your presentation changed everything," said a familiar voice behind him. Alan turned to find Zell-Turan, whose skin now regularly displayed the more vibrant patterns that had once been suppressed. The Zorathian scholar had undergone a remarkable transformation. "I simply pointed out what was already there," Alan replied modestly. "You did far more," Zell-Turan insisted. "You forced us to confront our own hypocrisy. For centuries, we pretended to be creatures of pure logic while secretly preserving our narrative traditions." They walked together through the exhibit hall, where visitors from across the Alliance examined displays explaining the adaptive functions of storytelling in various species. The council vote was unanimous. Zell-Turan said, "Your appointment as head of the new Interspecies Cultural Studies Division is effective immediately." Alan smiled. "I never expected my background in comparative mythology would lead to a position in galactic diplomacy. That is precisely why you are suited for it," Zell-Turan observed. "You understand that stories are not just entertainment. They are the foundation of how sentient beings make sense of existence." They passed a group of young Zorathians, engaged in what appeared to be a ritual storytelling circle, their skin patterns synchronized in a beautiful display of shared narrative. "The revival movement has spread to all 12 Zorathian worlds," Zell-Turan said, gesturing toward them. "Young people are rediscovering traditions their parents were taught to hide. It has created some tension with older generations, but also healing." "And the other Alliance species?" Alan asked. "Similar patterns everywhere. It seems once one group acknowledged their narrative traditions, others felt free to do the same. The Vexcor have opened their ancestral song chambers to the public for the first time in 500 cycles." They reached the central atrium, where preparations were underway for the first Interstellar Cultural Festival. Delegates from 27 worlds were setting up exhibits displaying their cultural narratives and mythology. "Our paper has been accepted by the High Council Science Directorate," Zell-Turan said with evident pride. "The narrative hypothesis of sentient development will be taught in all Alliance educational institutions." Alan examined the document on a nearby display. Their co-authored work proposed that narrative thinking wasn't opposed to scientific reasoning, but complementary to it, an essential cognitive tool that helped sentient species navigate complex social environments and transmit knowledge across generations. "I never thought I'd be teaching aliens about the value of human myths," Alan remarked. "And I never thought I would be learning from a species we initially classified as cognitively limited," Zell-Turan replied, his skin patterns indicating what Alan had learned to recognize as amusement. As they walked toward the diplomatic quarters, Alan noticed a small gathering in one of the side chambers. Zorathian officials sat in a circle with human delegates, listening intently to an elderly man. "That's my grandfather's story," Alan said softly, recognizing the tale being told. The old fisherman's tale of courage and perseverance during a great storm had been a bedtime staple in Alan's childhood. Now it was being shared with beings from another world, their alien eyes wide with interest, their translators working to convey not just the words but the emotional resonance of the human narrative. "It seems some truths are universal," Zell-Turan observed. "That's the power of stories," Alan replied. "They help us find the common ground between different experiences, even when those experiences take place on different worlds." As they watched the diverse gathering, humans and aliens brought together by a simple fisherman's tale, Alan felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Humanity had taken its place among the stars not by hiding its myths and legends, but by sharing them, by demonstrating their enduring value even in an age of interstellar travel and advanced technology. In the end, it wasn't sophisticated weapons or superior science that had earned humanity its place in the galactic community. It was the simple power of a well-told story. The symposium hall of Nexus 7 shimmered with holographic from 12 species gathered for the Zorathian presentation on human culture. Alan sat with the Earth delegation, his stomach tight with anxiety. The curved walls displayed enlarged images of Earth's most famous mythological scenes: Zeus hurling lightning, Norse gods battling giants, ancient Egyptian deities guiding souls to the afterlife. Exhilarating stood at the center of the hall, his skin rippling with confident blue patterns as he addressed the gathered aliens. Esteemed colleagues, today we present our preliminary analysis of human mythological constructs. The Zorathian began. As the newest potential members of our galactic community, understanding humanity's cognitive framework is essential. Ambassador Rice leaned toward Alan. Remember, we're here to listen, not argue. Alan nodded stiffly, watching as Exhilarating activated a three-dimensional projection showing the human brain. Human neural architecture reveals a species caught between primitive pattern recognition and higher reasoning, Exhilarating explained. This biological limitation manifests in their persistent creation of supernatural explanations even after discovering natural laws. The presentation continued with clinical precision. Exhilarating displayed creation myths from various Earth cultures, pointing out their scientific impossibilities. A timeline showed how humans clung to these stories long after developing technologies that should have made such beliefs obsolete. Note the logical contradiction, Exhilarating said, displaying an image of a modern church beside a physics laboratory. Humans maintain cultural institutions dedicated to preserving these factually incorrect narratives alongside centers of scientific discovery. Alan watched the faces of the alien delegates. Some showed the equivalent of puzzlement, others what appeared to be pity. The Vexnar representatives chittered quietly among themselves, their insect-like appendages gesturing toward the human delegation. Perhaps most concerning, Exhilarating continued, is how these mythological tendencies affect human decision-making. Their historical records show numerous instances where superstitious thinking led to violence or impeded scientific progress. Images flash showing book burnings, religious wars, and the persecution of scientists. Alan felt his chest tighten. The presentation was technically accurate, but stripped of all context and humanity. We therefore recommend classification of human culture as Level 3 developmental, showing promising technological advancement, but requiring guidance to overcome persistent cognitive limitations, Exhilarating concluded. With proper mentorship, humans may eventually outgrow their mythological thinking patterns and join the rational community of spacefaring species. Polite sounds of agreement rippled through the alien audience. Ambassador Reyes maintained a diplomatic smile, though her knuckles had whitened where she gripped her datavat. "Are there questions from our distinguished guests?" asked the Zorathian moderator. A reptilian delegate rose. "Have humans shown any recognition of their cognitive limitations? Do their more advanced thinkers acknowledge the irrationality of these beliefs? Some human philosophers have indeed recognized these contradictions," Exhilarating answered. "However, most humans remain emotionally attached to their mythological frameworks, defending them through circular reasoning they call faith." Alan couldn't take it anymore. He stood up suddenly, causing several aliens to turn toward him. "Permission to address the symposium," Alan said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Ambassador Rice tugged at his sleeve. "Dr. Murphy, this isn't the plan." The Zorathian moderator tilted her head. "The human cultural representative wishes to speak. This is unexpected but potentially informative. You may proceed." Alan walked to the center of the room, standing beside Exhilarating, whose skin now flickered with patterns of surprise and mild annoyance. "Thank you for this detailed analysis of human mythology," Alan began diplomatically. "However, I believe there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature and purpose of human storytelling." "There is no misunderstanding," Exhilarating replied. "We have analyzed thousands of human myths and identified their factual inaccuracies." "Factual accuracy was never their primary purpose," Alan said, his voice growing stronger. "By judging myths as failed science, you're misunderstanding their actual function in human development." The hall fell silent. Even the ambassador seemed curious now. "I request the opportunity to present an alternative interpretation of human mythology," Alan continued, looking directly at the Zorathian council members. "One that might help explain why even our most brilliant scientists and logical thinkers value these stories." The Zorathian officials conferred briefly.